Let's move on to that panel discussion. Artificial intelligence meets architecture, an exciting future in design and construction technology, or perhaps a load of nonsense that's overhyped, I might suggest. So Christopher, I'm going to start with you, because you and I had a quick chat outside about artificial intelligence and to what extent it's actually going to impact your world. Let's just recap that conversation. We were talking about what the potential is, but also what it's actually doing today in practice. What are you seeing?
I would agree with that. I would think that it is actually coming into practice, but it depends on to what extent you actually describe it. I mean, artificial intelligence is a very broad and it can be very general, but it also can be very narrow. And specifically in the industry, I would associate more to tasks. As in, if you have a problem or if there's a collection of data that you want to interpret, in that case, you can actually solve a problem using fitness functions and patterns, which is essentially mathematics to actually solve those problems. To actually associate it or to connect it to the overall industry or to the overall business, that's still many, many, I don't know, years or decades away. So if anything, it should sort of help us solve problems, but not necessarily replace us.
Can you give us an example of a problem it could help us solve now, or perhaps has helped you and your team solve?
Sure. For those of you from Dubai, or maybe the visitors will have seen already, there's the Museum of the Future that's actually going up under construction on Sheikh Zayed Road. And you'll actually see that the diagrid or the steel structure that's being built at the moment, I mean, we used in-house, we essentially created a series of algorithms and a series of fitness functions to actually help us determine exactly how to actually place the steel structure.
You mean it's not going to fall over and crush the metro?
I will have to say no, it won't.
I'm glad to hear it. We'll get back to that in a second. Dale Sinclair, similar question to you, almost kind of theory and practice of artificial intelligence. In theory, what could it do? In practice, is it doing anything?
I think in practice, it's not really doing too much architectural at present. Machine learning is where we see the future in terms of specific AI technologies. The challenge with machine learning is it needs a lot of data to start to make sense of what we do. And that would need hundreds and hundreds of models. And of course, aggregating all that information is not easily done because we tend to keep our own models on our own servers. So certainly that's the first challenge, is actually having the quantity of data to make sense. I think the second thing is, and this is probably the main thing, is that as architects we design intuitively. So it's very difficult for an AI technology to make any headway when 90% of what I do is kept in my head. So that's probably the main challenge, is how do the experts, or how do the AI tools get hold of the knowledge that resides in the heads of the experts?
Hani, if I can turn to you. I mean, you've been at many of some of the most technologically advanced institutions on earth, MIT, for example, and now you're at DD here in Dubai. So more from the theoretical, academic side, let's look at the potential for AI.
Definitely. The way we're approaching it is that we need our students to rethink how they approach problem solving in design or architecture. So for instance, in the past, it's been a lot of emphasis on visual literacy. Now we're combining digital fluency together. So when they get combined, there's a new way of thinking. So at the IDI, our first year, we're teaching students to observe the world through understanding systems and generative drawings. So I don't think this is common yet in foundation year. Usually it's observing behaviors or observing visual through sketching, etc. Now we're introducing with that a layer of understanding systems, whether they're natural systems or artificial systems. So the student from first year starts to parse the world that we live in a more systematic way, but then adding the layer of visual design on top of it. So it's a combination now. We think this combinational learning is what will help them harness the power of artificial intelligence and see it as a tool that will augment their creativity rather than repress it or get them to be intimidated by it.
So are they going to have to be able to code to take advantage of all this? Is that just a language that students of today at DD, and certainly the students of tomorrow, will have in the way that we all have to be literate in words and we have to be vaguely mathematically literate?
When we think of coding, we do teach coding, but it's not a course on its own. We embed it in the curriculum, so it's not seen, ooh, it's coding. But it's actually a way of thinking, like you learn how to sketch, you learn how to write basic code in order to generate form. So the end result coding for us is another tool and knowledge which helps you generate form. So coding is essential, but we don't see it as a core thing that we teach. But it's taught in an indirect way because they're visual learners at the end of the day. Design doesn't attract mathematicians, it attracts visual learners. But we want them to understand the power of coding and harness it through visual learning again.
Well, I mean, it's an interesting point you make there about mathematicians, because coming back to your example of the Museum of the Future, has anyone not seen the skeleton of the Museum of the Future? Perhaps if you're a visitor to Dubai. It's pretty much everyone's seen it. It's a very dramatic structure. And presumably there's quite a lot of maths. You touched on this, but there must be quite a lot of maths have gone in to making that work. I know Sean Killer probably dreamt it up at 3 o'clock in the morning and said, oh, this looks lovely, but there will be a lot of maths to make that work.
Most definitely. And I think the mathematics that was behind it was actually founded in the actual computational individuals that we actually brought on board to help us actually resolve it. Those are not necessarily skills that every engineer, every architect, or every designer has, but practices are slowly starting to acquire those skill sets in-house. Now, it's great to be able to have it sort of at your fingertips, at your disposal in Dubai, but sometimes you actually have to reach abroad. Obviously, the greatest brain drain is coming perhaps from, I don't know, Silicon Valley or from China. But slowly but surely, we're starting to see it infiltrate the actual industry, just in being able to be versed in, let's say, coding or scripting or fundamental mathematics. You don't actually have to be a computer programmer, but you do need to understand the limitations of what you can actually pull out of it.
And I guess, I mean, for both of you guys, you work for very large organizations, AECOM and Buro Happold. Do you have all of this capability in-house? Or does even an organization of your scale need to go to specialist outside consultants for some of this computational, to use your phrase, work?
I think when it comes to that, I mean, going back to your question about coding, I mean, for us, there's a big difference between scripting and coding. So certainly we've got a lot of our team using visual scripting skills for mainly doing a geometric analysis, or not analysis, or really the setting out that would then be used by the engineer. So I don't know, it's hard to say what the future holds for education, but certainly coding is, I don't think would be the top of our priorities. We do employ specific coders using C# and some of these new coding technologies, but it's not an immediate priority. But going back to the generative way of working, I think the challenge for us as architects is much of what we do is subjective. So in terms of an AI environment, the whole challenge is how do you make the subjective objective? Because until you can actually analyze, like, you know, people were talking about happiness this morning, or a square. How do we know that people actually like the things that they see? So I think from an architectural perspective, it's actually more challenging an AI into the future, because we've actually got to measure things that we currently can't measure.
In terms of using AI in space planning, on the radio show I present, we spoke to the guys from Blue House Architecture, which is a Dubai-based architecture design firm. Is anyone from Blue House here, by the way? No. But what they were saying was that they're beginning to see applications for AI, and they started as an interior company. They do architecture now. I think they call them public utility type buildings. Hospitals and schools were two of them. And they said, if you want to get optimal space planning, then actually AI is quite good at that, for that very sort of functional type of design. Obviously, there are many, many other layers of the process, but purely for the basics of, we've got this many square feet, we can build G+4 or whatever it is. These are the parameters and the limitations, and the AI would spew out quite a few different options that you could use. And he said that is beginning to be helpful. Does that resonate with any of you, that kind of process?
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's a very fine line between what we would call rules-based generative design and AI. I would call that more generative design, which is not what we see as the future in terms of true AI technologies. And sorry, going back to your earlier question, I mean, the tools that we use just now, the coding and scripting, we do in-house, but we have started to look at partnering with external AI companies because it actually starts to involve different skill sets altogether. It's more physicists and other professions that actually write the rules that the AI kind of, the true AI kind of technologies really feed upon. I mean, I think going back to this point about when will AI start to kick in for architecture, well, in the legal profession, it really has kicked in a major way, and that's because a lot of the legal content is machine readable. And I don't think we'll get true AI tools like machine learning really moving until we can get machine-readable content in vast quantities that AI tools can use.
Let's throw this open to the floor. Is there anyone here who's using AI in any practical way in any of their design? I mean, we're talking about architecture here, but I'd be happy to broaden it out. Is anyone actually using it here? Artificial intelligence? No one. Anyone thinking about using it? Yes. Okay, here we go. Can we get a microphone to this gentleman, please?
So I run a laser scanning business, and we laser scan 3D model buildings. The data that we collect essentially maps the geometry of the building. And over the course of a construction project, obviously, as the building gets built, the geometry changes. The theory is that if we can run code on that data, we'll be able to accurately see the extent of work that's done, compare that against contractor valuations to make sure that they only get paid for what they've done, make sure that the contractor is building as per the original design, make sure that they're claiming as per the changes that they make. So it's a project management tool. It's a BIM tool for checking quality of work and being able to then quantify off that data. So if you have a large-scale project and you can measure data sets at clear intervals along the way, it'll give you a great insight to the accuracy and the progress of really what's happening on site. So we want an AI algorithm to help us do that. And if anybody knows how to do that, that would be really useful. So yeah, no, we are looking for people to help us develop that tool, and I think it could be of real value.
And perhaps, back to your point, Dale, about, you mentioned machine learning,
Yeah.
that if you start getting, if you do enough projects, or if enough consultancies like you around the world do enough projects and all the data is pooled, then could the machines potentially learn?
I think that's the AI that really becomes benefit for us doing buildings. And back to my point about us designing intuitively. So let's say I'm doing 300 office buildings and I can put those into an AI tool. We can then start to get that tool to look at the patterns and the differences between the different buildings. And I'm sure most people in this room are familiar with BIM tools like clash detection. Well, what clash detection won't do is pick up, for example, a column that doesn't hit the slab, because there is no clash. So what we've found is, certainly in our early kind of experiments with AI tools, is all of a sudden we can use it to find these things out, because it flags these things up as anomalies. So yeah, we see really the first iterations of AI tools in practice will be as anomaly checkers to really see if it finds a pattern that it hasn't seen in another building.
Hani, looking at your various experience, I know you spent time in the United States, Beirut as well, of course, you spent a lot of time there. Now, of course, spending a lot of time here in Dubai. What are you seeing around the world in terms of the nascent use of, and let's broaden this out, not just AI, but we could look at other fourth industrial revolution technologies, if you like. What are you seeing academically that interests you, and what are you seeing practically that interests you and excites you?
Well, the first thing is that I find that what universities today are churning out is not totally relevant to where the market is going. And I'm sure that my colleagues here, when you're looking for people to hire, you're finding a gap between where we're going, what universities are churning out. And one of the driving factors for starting the Dubai Institute of Design and Innovation in Dubai is to try to bridge that gap, to understand where the market is going and prepare students to be future-proofed for that. In terms of the fourth industrial revolution, the key thing that I find is differentiating it from the third and the second is not only the Internet of Things, but on a human level, what it's engendering is a desire for fulfillment. So we call this generation entitled, because they have access to so much that they're seeking fulfilling experiences. And designers are right in the sweet spot of that, because if we use design thinking properly, we start with empathy, which is what we heard in the last wonderful talk we had. So empathy is what differentiates designers from other fields. And this is a moment for designers to actually become center stage and no longer marginalized or on the periphery. But we go into the boardrooms and we show businesses that understanding design, using design methodologies that we all understand here, is actually going to solve the wicked problems in an empathetic and human way.
Who's got any other questions for the panel? We're talking about AI, but we can broaden it out. Yes, please. Couple of questions here at the front.
Hi, my name is Neil Eldon, and I represent a UK-based company called Elmar Architects. I believe most of the practices from my experience in the UK, we do use artificial intelligence. Although
you could hold the microphone a bit closer.
Yeah, we didn't really raise our hands, but my colleagues will know more than I. I mean, we use building information modeling programs that we quite a lot depend on the information that we obtain from these Tekla structures or Tekla structural designer or Autodesk Revit, which we employ in our practice. My question will be mainly to Hani and in the broader to other colleagues. Do you believe in the forthcoming years or decades that artificial intelligence will replace the design aspect of human being? For example, I mean, pre-coded, robots or design softwares will be able to really sketch an idea which is not being coded into. Thank you.
Okay. It's a good question. It's a question we face all the time. I would say in the next couple of decades, based on my understanding and basic understanding, I don't think it will replace. We want to differentiate between tasks and jobs. So artificial intelligence today can replace tasks, menial tasks, calculations, making assumptions and doing estimations and permutations of a certain form. But it will not replace the subjectivity, which you talked about, of the designer. Now, what it can do with the future, with a few steps of writing a simple code, even a 4-step code, and our students are doing it already, you can take simple forms and generate multiple possibilities in it. So that will make the job of the designer easier. So my sense is that the tool of artificial intelligence, and I stress the word tool, will augment our profession, but it will not replace it. We will be able to do more with that tool. So I see it as an opportunity rather than a threat.
A very quick word, Chris and Dale.
Yeah, I mean, for me, there's still a lot of emphasis on the geometry that we do as architects, and I don't think architects are leveraging the data that we could potentially into the future. So I think that's the next trend. But I think things start to get really exciting when we start to automate in the engineering analysis software into the model. And once we can start to iterate in real time, I think that becomes game-changing. But for me, the two themes that I would say into the future are craft and automate. What can we automate, and what remains as craft? So that subjectivity. I don't think buildings in the future will all look the same. So it means that there's still a role of the architect to give the look and feel and make a building be unique, because at the end of the day is what's core to what we do as artists. But also playing in social value and all these other topics from a data point of view. So for me, I'm in my mind just now, I'm trying to think, and even from a construction point of view, so what things will be built by robots and what things will remain a craft. Maybe we still make things with timber or maybe bricks. So all the time I'm trying to put into those two compartments, is this going to be a craft in the future, or is this something that's going to be automated?
I just want to comment on the point of data, and I know that the topic of BIM is it's been around for the last decade, if not more. But if anything, the industry that we're in is poised to actually take advantage of this new generation of BIM-savvy architecture. Basically, BIM is just a big repository of data. And essentially, the amount of information that those things contain, if there's a means of unlocking it through pattern discovery or through artificial intelligence, if anything, we're poised to actually, gain design or gain knowledge from that actual source. Now, okay, BIM, the way that we apply it, is typically front-loaded, where we actually input design into it. But newer buildings actually have sensors built into them, or perhaps there's essentially a feedback loop that actually comes out of these buildings, if it's life cycle analysis, or if it's equipment performance, or if it's even space planning and just natural patterns of people movements. All that will essentially serve as the data that can actually allow us to actually, leverage and extract inspiration from, and inspiration in terms of technical validity to our design. So if anything, I don't think that the industry is essentially going to get supplanted by artificial intelligence. It's just going to sort of leverage it, if anything.
A quick word, you mentioned a couple of companies when we were chatting over coffee earlier, and I'm keen to get to your question, so just a brief answer. Could Autodesk, for example, create some kind of AI design-generating architectural robot, or perhaps Google or someone like that?
I would say that Autodesk is probably the closest positioned software developer to do it, only because they're in our industry. Google, Facebook, Amazon, all these sort of Uber, they're not necessarily in our industry. Whereas, so Autodesk is, but Autodesk has a brilliant business model. They're essentially churning out, software licenses that we pay for. There's no hardware development, it's all software. So for them to actually become the architect might not necessarily be on their business plan. That's not their agenda. But like you said, if it's a matter of coming up with a tool to actually, allow architecture to expand or to rethink itself, I would definitely think that they can do that. And if you attend any of the Autodesk universities, they're already showcasing some of those options. So they're coming, and you look forward to almost using them.
You draw a facade and it says, would you like a mash of beer on this, perhaps?
But again, architecture, I'd like to think it's more than catalog selection. It's not a matter of just sort of having a catalog that you can sort of flick through and choose your building. You actually have to, there's a lot of time and subjectiveness and effort that goes into it. And it's a process. Again, it's not something that's sort of, you don't buy a building and a week later it's built. Well, maybe in some place it is. But over time, there's so many stakeholders, and there's so much investment, and there's so many decisions that need to be made, and these constantly have to be factored into the decisions that are made. So essentially, that's where you sort of have to stitch together these tools to actually, realize the design, and that's where the architect actually sits. They sit in that pivotal point.
My thanks to, first of all, Hani Asfour of DD, to Dale Sinclair of ACOM, and Chris Rodzicki of Borough Happel. Thanks very much indeed, gents. Take a seat.